All right. Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology Podcast. I believe this is episode 2.4. We're like 7 weeks into the season. We've done 4 episodes. Not a good ratio. We'll do better in the new year. But my name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by my good friend Graham Dorn. Graham, we were going to try and get together on Saturday, and then I messed up my schedule, told my mom, yeah, come on down. Completely forgot. Just wall to wall. Great day of games to watch. We should have been together for that, but how you been? I haven't seen you in like 2 weeks.
Things are good. The Kansas City Chiefs are closing in on one seed. So if that ends up making for a very Merry Christmas, I'll be a very happy person.
There you go. Let's hope Patty Mahomes is all right. I forgot I'm gonna starting every episode with a little basketball shot here. Not even close. Nowhere to go but up. Don't mind the mound of toilet paper behind me. Elfie is paying us a visit for today. So we're gonna go conference by conference. We only got five major conferences anymore, and then we'll hit on the what you've just dubbed the March Madness logo for the rest of the leagues. But I'm going to try and share this periodically if I can remember how to do that. There, I think it's probably up there now. But so we're going to go league by league, just discussing not where the teams are right now. Right. I think that has been a lot of confusion since you shared it on Twitter. We'll really get into that in the March Madness logo section. But so the ACC, as an example, alphabetically, it's first. You have six teams on here total right now. I have five of them in. I do not have Louisville in. SMU is my last team in, but it does feel like ultimately it's a 3 or 4 bid league. The ACC has not been good. Do you have any general overall thoughts on the ACC before we get into a few of these teams in particular?
The way they were dominated by the SEC will not be forgotten by the committee. Beyond the metrics, just the sheer overall record of losing 30 games to the SEC in non-conference play, that's really going to hit hard on Selection Sunday. So, yeah, I think we're looking at probably a 4-bid league. 5 would be generous. I doubt it's going to end up just being a 3-bid league, but you can't even say that's impossible. I mean, it could certainly work out that way. But I think 4 bids is probably expected. 5 is a little bit more likely than 3.
All right, so I think we're in agreement on each of these categories. This was yours. You tweeted this out earlier today. We'll disagree on some of it. ACC, I think we're pretty close. Definitely Duke, very likely in. I believe I have them at 5 overall, so my top number 2 seed. Pitt and Clemson pretty comfortably in right now. But those likely bubble teams, not great. Where's the stop share so we can have some images of us again. Got to see our smiling faces from time to time. I'll try and put that up again. But yeah, Duke, they're not going to miss the tournament at this point, although all they really have left is opportunities to weaken their resume in a terrible ACC. Between Pitt and Clemson, who are you more confident in ultimately getting into the tournament?
More confident in Pitt. I think I just think they're a little bit better team than Clemson. The other thing that they have going for them is Clemson's already lost a few questionable games. Pitt has kind of avoided the questionable losses the same way. Obviously, Mississippi State got them really badly, but that was one game on the road that can kind of happen to anybody. So I think Pitt's in a little bit better shape moving forward than Clemson. If you were to ask me who has a stronger resume right now, I'd say they're pretty much neck and neck. I think I would go with Pitt before Clemson if I had to choose, but they're right there. In fact, on my overall seed list for my new bracket, I had Pitt just in front of Clemson. But I think moving forward, projecting where I think these teams are going to be, I think Pitt is a safer pick than Clemson.
Yeah, I have Clemson. Actually, I think 2 seed lines higher. They were my bottom 4, and I think Pitt's my bottom 6. But I mean, I agree with you. Like losing by 33 to Mississippi State is not as bad of a result as Clemson losing in overtime at home to Memphis, and losing at home or losing at South Carolina in overtime. Like they have less room for error moving forward, even though I do have them slightly ahead. I do still have North Carolina in the field, but I don't like it at all. That was before, so that published Tuesday mornings. That was 12 hours before they lost to Florida. They would probably be, right there with SMU as like my last team in now. And even that is just on principle more so than resume, right? Where are you with the Tar Heels now?
Well, I had them as a 10 seed, and after they lost to Florida, I moved them all the way out of the bracket. And that's not to say
Yeah.
that was a punishing loss. It wasn't. It was a game that they easily could have won, but there's just a certain point where the losses, no matter how hard the schedule is, it's just too much. And right now, looking at a 6-5 team, like, just think about that. They're 6-5. I think they're definitely within striking range of getting right back into the bracket. And ultimately, I think North Carolina probably will make the field, but it's going to be close. It's going to be just on that border. Ultimately, I think what UNC is probably going to do is actually win a few of these games. I kind of think they're going to beat UCLA because they're going to be absolutely desperate for a victory.
Yeah. I mean, that's one theory. I had that same theory about Arizona, and they did not beat UCLA. So we'll see if they can get it. They do need it. Was it 2 years ago when they were like 1-12 against Quad One? At least they have the one already with that win over Dayton in Maui, which only got stronger with age. But yeah, they've just aside from that, and even in that one, they had to come back from what they were down 18 or something in the second half. Aside from that miraculous comeback for a 2-point win over an A10 team, they've done nothing good. I really question whether they'll get in. And then, as I mentioned, I had SMU as my last team in, but I'm not by no means am I sold on them getting in. That was more of a somebody has to be in. And I wanted to put Washington State there, but Washington State lost by 17 to SMU. And I think at this point in the season, that was enough of a tiebreaker for me. Do you think the Mustangs are a legitimately good candidate? I mean, you have them at the top of your likely bubble, so I assume that means you moved them ahead of North Carolina.
Yeah, I did. I moved them onto the 11 line, right in front of Washington State, who Washington State got moved to the first four, and SMU right
Yeah.
ahead because of that exact head-to-head result. And I think also the LSU win is looking a little bit better, and for bad reasons, right? Like LSU beat Stetson by 1 million, but LSU looks a little bit better according to the computer. So I think that helps SMU's case a little bit. But really, I think moving forward, I have more confidence in UNC than I do SMU. But right now, I think SMU has a couple of quality wins, a nice overall record, and I think that's a differentiator from current stance.
Reshare screen here. I'm learning new technologies on the fly. We'll move on to the Big East. I don't Louisville you had on the likely bubble. I assume you also have them out. I don't think they're all that close right now, but they're the only other ACC team even worth remotely mentioning. The Big East, Marquette in Connecticut. Connecticut, we just watched get that overtime win against Xavier. Lo and behold, Connecticut can win a Big East opener. Well, they're 5-0 in championship games and 4-16 in Big East openers over the last 2 decades. Finally won one, and Marquette certainly comfortably in. I believe I had them at 8 or 9 overall. Yeah, they're both like 2, 3 seeds right now, right? Marquette and UConn.
Yeah, I think for me, UConn and Marquette were actually both 3 seeds, but I do see a difference there. I think UConn was barely sneaking onto the 3 line, and that was partially due to one actually having 3 quad 1 wins that they picked up back to back to back. So a very quick uh, turnaround for UConn in that regard. But the other thing is, Marquette, despite having a couple of really good wins in quad 1, they also are kind of at that point where you look at their resume and you're like, yeah, I don't know. The resume metrics are right about being at the 9 level. The efficiency metrics are right about being at the 11 level. I feel like just outside of that 2 range is right. And I think we're kind of at that point where we have a few more teams that look like 3 seeds than look
Hmm.
like 2 seeds. So I see a big gap between, for example, Marquette and UConn. At the same time, sometimes they just all fall into the same seed line. So Marquette, I think, is in better shape than UConn right now.
Yeah, I think if Marquette had beaten it was Wisconsin they just lost to, right? Was that 2 weeks ago? I don't know. December all blurs together. But if they had won that game, they would have been like right in that 1 seed mix. Now they're, in the 2 seed mix. I think I had them at 9 overall.
It
We
was
got
the
to talk
Dayton
St.
Biggie
John's.
Wisconsin.
What was that? Oh yeah, Dayton. That's right. They lost to Dayton. Yeah, how do I forget that? Dayton got so much power because of that. St. John's we got to talk about though. I had already like mentally moved on to them and forgotten about Marquette's schedule. So St. John's is 0-2 in quad one, no quad two games, and you have them as probably in. Is that entirely because of Ken Palm or where are we at there?
So, I mean, two things. One, it's because of Ken Palm, but also because I believe in Ken Palm in this specific regard. There's certain teams where you look at their efficiency metrics and you're like, you know what? I don't really buy that one. St. John's is one of those teams where I don't know if you saw the quote from Rick Pitino talking about DePaul. He's like, oh, I can't believe we're 14.5-point favorites. These guys don't know what they're talking about. And of course, St. John's blows them out of the water. So maybe those guys do know a little bit what they're talking about. And I think St. John's is at this point, their resume is weak, but it's only going to get better, in my opinion. And it's already a resume worthy of being in the tournament field at this point. And I think it will get a lot better. I think they're going to be the clear number 3 in the Big East. And I think there's no way the Big East isn't going to be at least a 3-bid league. I know last year it was crazy that they ended up being a
Yeah.
3-bid league, but that took a ton of different factors to even end up there. To me, I think St. John's is clearly going to be one of the top 3 teams in the Big East, and they should be getting a bid.
Yeah, I mean, I think their overall resume is fine, even though they don't have the quality wins. I mean, they beat New Mexico at home, beat Virginia on a neutral. Obviously, you mentioned the DePaul win. I don't. I watched most of the game against Georgia that they lost, but that was like in the Bahamas. It was like an 11 a.m. tip off. It was a weird situation. It was just an ugly game from start to finish. But yeah, I do agree. They'll probably get in, even though their resume, as far as the resume metrics, they're like 50th SOR KPI and WAB. But
Yeah, and I mean
yeah, I
this
think they're better than that.
this isn't just about tournament seeding either, right? This is about actually getting into the field. Are you very likely to get in? Are you probably going to get in? I think St. John's may not have a great seed
Yeah.
because of not really doing much out of conference, but the odds of not actually making the tournament, I think, are incredibly low.
All right. And then the other two teams that you have likely on the bubble, maybe Creighton has changed after they lost by 24 to Georgetown. It's starting to feel like Kansas's loss at Creighton is going to be looking like Duke's loss at Arkansas last year, where it's just like, they got caught on November, whatever, on the road, tough environment, but that team does kind of suck. Maybe we should put Georgetown on there instead of Creighton at this point.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think the big thing for Creighton is we didn't exactly know what they were going to look like post Pop Isaacs, and this was a very bad performance without Pop Isaacs. I think there had been some optimism within the Creighton program that perhaps this would give Ashworth a little bit more room to operate, and what we ended up seeing was a team that really wishes Pop Isaacs was healthy. So I kind of put them down there as a bubble team. If you looked at their efficiency metrics, you'd think, yeah, they should probably be in. They've already got a win over Kansas. But this was me kind of projecting, well, we don't know what Pop's situation is going to look like. If he's not playing, they might end up being a pretty poor basketball team. And I think what we saw today was a good example of that. So, yeah, I think they're probably going to hover around that bubble. But at this point, I think it's unlikely they'll make the tournament based on what we saw today.
Yeah, they were my next to last team in 2 days ago. Now I would certainly have them out after the loss to Georgetown, but like you said, the metrics are pretty good, at least the predictive metrics, not so much the resume metrics, which are about to get worse after a loss to Georgetown. But Villanova, so you have Villanova on there ahead of Xavier. That was one that was a little curious to me. What, give me your rationale there.
I think Villanova's getting a lot better. That's what my rationale is. I think they started the season very poorly. And if you look at what they've been doing over the last month, looks like a pretty good basketball team, kind of quietly. Nobody's really talking about it. I think everybody wrote off the entire team, and Kyle Neptune, I think, had been written off. And I'm not saying I suddenly think Kyle Neptune's a great coach, but I do think the team they have on the court is pretty good, and the Big East could get a fourth bid. And so I think Villanova could be that team. If you see Creighton fall by the wayside and Xavier fall by the wayside without Fremantle, I think Villanova could sneak in and potentially be one of those teams that steals a bit from the Big East.
So you were factoring in the Fremantle injury when you did not even consider Xavier a bubble team, which I think that is an astute observation.
That's exactly what I did. Yeah.
All right. Oh shoot, how do I share this again? But yeah, those are the only five Big East teams I think are even them and Xavier. But maybe Georgetown. We'll have to look at Georgetown in the morning.
I
Where
will
are we
say
at here?
Georgetown
There's the
completely
share.
caught me off guard, but also Xavier looked better tonight than I thought they were going to look. So, I was kind of writing off Xavier a little bit, thinking of the Fremantle injury, but the way they
Mhm.
performed tonight, maybe they've got something in store for us.
Yeah. I think Georgetown was like 80th on Ken Palm coming into the day, and I only know that because I wrote about something on Thomas Sorber, their freshman big man, who actually didn't even do all that much in this game against Creighton, which just further proves how not well Creighton played in that game. Let's go on to the Big Ten, where we have, well, you have six very likely teams. I agree with five of them: Illinois, Purdue, Oregon, UCLA, Michigan State. Among those five, anybody that you want to hit on in particular, why you feel strongly about any of them?
I think that the one that I'd kind of focus on is Oregon, just because they've completely outperformed expectations. I'm still not sold on them, but what they've done to this point, picking up that neutral court win against Alabama in particular, is going to be one that would catch the committee's attention at the end of the year. I could definitely see Oregon sliding as the season continues, but I think they've done so much that they're still very likely to make the tournament.
Yeah, Oregon is kind of their resume is looking a bit like Memphis's was around this time last year, where it's like, wow, they're top seven or whatever in all the resume metrics, and the predictives don't really buy them. So yeah, I can see them, especially in the Big Ten, where nobody's great, but everybody's kind of good outside of like USC and Minnesota and Washington. Like they could go 500 in that league and still be a pretty good team, and then that would really hurt their resume in the end. But we got to talk Maryland because they are not very likely, and I think you're crazy. So Maryland's seven wins over teams, I believe they were all outside the Ken Palm top 250. Here were their margins of victory: 30, 31, 34, 24, 38, 54, and 71. Average margin of victory of 40.3 points. They are on the Iowa State train from last year where they're just destroying bad teams. And they did blow out Ohio State. That was the one good thing I think they did, but barely beat Villanova, lost to Purdue, lost to Marquette. They haven't done anything bad, but I'm not like they're like 17th or something on Ken Palm. I'm not all the way in on them by any stretch of the imagination. You want to have them probably in, go for it. But even right now, I only see them as a 9 or a 10 seed.
This may personally be a little bit biased on my part. I think they're going to win the Big Ten. That's my bold pick for conference champions at this point. I think Maryland will end up being the Big Ten regular season champion. So I'm a big believer in the Terps.
Gonna, I'm gonna figure out how to clip that and save it for later because that's gonna look funny if it's dead wrong. Probably in Michigan, Wisconsin, and this is the part that like I think I have Michigan 5 seed lines ahead of Maryland, which is why that one really jumped out at me. I would have Michigan as very likely as opposed to Maryland. Why are you a bit lower on Michigan?
I think again, it just comes down to what I personally am projecting forward for the teams. I just think Maryland's a better team than Michigan. I currently both of them on a 7 line, both Michigan and Maryland. So I see them very similarly today. But again, I just think Maryland's actually the better basketball team, and I think they're going to prove that over the course of the season.
All right. We'll see if all these blowouts of garbage teams actually does anything for them. Wisconsin, I agree, probably. And of the likely bubble, right? So we already have 8 projected in. How many do you think the Big Ten gets in the end? That was kind of a weird wording of a sentence, but I think it's probably a 10 bid league, if only because the ACC and the Big East don't have much going on. So which of those likely bubble teams do you feel best about?
Yeah, I think it's probably a 10 bid league, but I think it's more likely an 11 bid league than a 9 bid league. And the teams that I think are most likely to make it are really the two at the top. I think Nebraska and Penn State would be the two that I think are the most likely to be those 10th teams. And I kind of have it in descending order there of who I'm thinking of. I think Indiana and Iowa would be my next two. Northwestern, I don't feel really great about, but I think they're likely to be a bubble team, probably just not on the right side.
Let's talk about Rutgers, though. I think we have to talk Rutgers since you have them on there, and I don't disagree with them being on there, but resume wise, they shouldn't be based on some of the teams. Like their average metric across the board is somewhere around 80th, and you do not have a few teams who are in like the 55 to 60 range. So is that just I believe in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey and the complete lack of anything else they have on that roster?
That's pretty much, you completely nailed it. Why some other teams aren't on here, and they are, is the upside is really high. And I think we are going to see Rutgers outperform at times. And that's kind of why I have them on there, but on the lower end of the likely bubble. I think they are less likely to make the tournament than Iowa, Indiana, Nebraska, and Penn State. But I do think they're going to be there kind of with Ohio State as a bit more of a wild card where there's going to be times they look really good. There's also going to be a lot of losses along the way.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll probably go like 9-11, all nine of the wins at home in Big Ten play because you don't go to the RAC or the Jersey Mike's Arena or whatever the hell they're calling it now and walk away with a W. Let's go to the Big 12. Again, I agree with most of your very likely ends. Shoot, there's the share screen.
I
All
know
right.
exactly what you're going to disagree with. I can tell
Yeah,
you.
yeah. It's
Yep.
definitely Kansas. No. No, Iowa State, Houston, Kansas, Baylor, they're all going to get in. Baylor of the four is probably the most questionable, but even at that, I think they're comfortably. And then Cincinnati, same thing as Maryland, right? I even jotted them down. There are 7 wins against nobodies by 16, 17, 18, 23, 27, 37, 55. Average margin of 28 points. They've done nothing. They've just barely beat Xavier by 3 at home. And that was Fremantle was already out for that game, wasn't he? Or no, he did
No,
play.
he played that game, and then it was after
Yeah,
that game that he went out.
yep. So they barely won that game, and it's a rivalry game, whatever, but not good, and lost to Villanova in what was really their one real opportunity. Tell me about Cincinnati, why you believe in them. I think I have them at like 31 on my seed list. Yeah, I have 30, Cincinnati 30, Texas Tech 31. I feel like they should be in the same category.
Yeah, I have Cincinnati as a 9 seed currently, but the reason I think they're very likely is not just because of the efficiency metrics. I also think you have to consider what the Big 12 conference is this year. And it's not the Big 12 of the past few years. It is a conference where it's going to be a little bit easier to get some victories. And I think Cincinnati is going to pile up a fair amount of victories. And I think that was something that cost them a little bit last year is they had that weak non-conference schedule and they got some quality wins in Big 12 play. It just wasn't quite enough to get over that hump. I think this year they're going to find that their overall record is going to be a little bit better. And I do think it's going to be just enough because look at, Kansas State. I thought they were going to be an NCAA tournament team before the year. They're not. BYU, I thought was going to be an NCAA tournament team. They're questionable. Arizona, I thought was going to be a top 4 seed, and they're probably not even going to make the tournament. So I'm just seeing a big vacuum of teams in the Big 12, and I think Cincinnati's going to be there as that team that just wins enough games. You see it happen with the ACC every year. Somebody's just going to win enough games in the conference because the league's good enough to get a certain amount of bids, and somebody is just going to win the games that get them there. I think Cincinnati is going to be that team.
That's fair. I can't argue with you. Texas Tech, you have probably in. Again, I wrote down there. They're just blowing out bad teams. 21, 25, 33, 34, 36, 47. Average margin of victory of 32.7 points. against teams outside the Ken Palm top 150, but they are 0-1 in quad one. They have not played a quad two game. They suffered a quad three loss. Like I mean, I'm with you that they probably get in, but not because I believe in them, but because they probably are the sixth best team in the Big 12, and that should be a six, seven, eight bid league. But I don't believe in them at all thus far. I think they are finding all the ways to not properly use JT Toppin to the best of his abilities. Like it's like they're not interested in doing their best. Um, how many bids do you think the Big 12 ultimately does get?
It's tough to say. I think because you have such varied resumes early on in the league. So you've got, West Virginia with a neutral court win over Gonzaga. You've got Arizona State with terrific resume metrics, but both those teams have very relatively poor predictives for teams that want to compete for the NCAA tournament. You've got Arizona over here with four wins on the season, but their predictive metrics are still very good.
Hmm.
So I think it is a tough call. I think ultimately you're probably looking at a 9 bid league if I had to guess, but might be 8. I think it's unlikely to get to the 10 mark. I think we're probably looking at the 8 or 9 range. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably eight, and I think you certainly could argue that Colorado and UCF should be added on as likely bubble. I don't know why I forgot what the words were real quick, but yeah, just from that sense of there are going to be teams who stockpile enough quality wins and their metrics are decent enough. Colorado already had that, you know, turned out to be a phenomenal win over Connecticut. I think that'll pay dividends in the long run, even though Connecticut was at a weird point in the season right there. Share screen. SEC, aside from all of it being in, I guess South Carolina is not, even with their win over Clemson yesterday. Um, so eight teams very likely in, a ninth probably in, and then six more likely bubble. I have 13 in and two more among my first four out. So literally the entire league except for South Carolina, if it was a 72 team tournament right now. Which SEC team do you think is most likely to falter? And I assume if you have Oklahoma all the way down in likely bubble, that's the one.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in the Sooners. That might not sound like I'm being fair to them. Maybe I'm not, but this happened last year with Oklahoma. They started out 10-0. I believe 10-0 was what they maxed out at. They had great resume metrics and even better predictive metrics last year than they have at this point this year. And I think Oklahoma's seeing a very similar thing this year to what they saw last year, which is they got a few decent wins, but they got a lot of bad wins too, just automatic wins. And all they've really done is play slightly above expectation. And I think that's going to catch up to them in SEC play. I'm not a believer in Oklahoma in the long term. I think they're going to be a bubble team, and I think there's good reason to say that they should be high up on the bracket right now. I have them as a 7 seed personally, but I think that's kind of a little generous compared to what they've really truly done. Great record, good quad splits when you look at it that way, but who have they really beaten that impresses you? And I think that's kind of a tough question. And I think it's kind of a junior version of Florida, where you look at Florida and you're like, yeah, it's great, it's undefeated, and they look good, but like, who have you really beaten? And I think Oklahoma is a junior version of that.
Yeah, I don't know if Arizona is still top 50 in the net, but that was Oklahoma's quad one win, and they barely won that one, right? Arizona had multiple chances at the end to tie it up and just couldn't hit anything. They barely beat Providence before that to set up that game. So yeah, I think you got a great point. I also see a zero next to the loss column in their name, and I have a hard time not wanting to believe in them at least a little bit. Uh, let's go quick to the March Madness category where we have Gonzaga very likely in, Memphis probably in, probably moving up to very likely in after that road win over Virginia today. Even though it's not particularly great win, that's one of the best wins left that they can get. I agree with you not having them as very likely in prior to that, just because of the number of opportunities to suffer losses that they have the rest of the way, even though they have what four quad one wins, three of them quad one A. Like they have one of the best resumes in the country. Like I think I have them as a four seed, but I agree that they are questionable to ultimately make it, and that's not just because I had them as a two seed at this time last year and they completely shit the bed. I think it's a better team. I think they can figure it out, but um, what do you think they need to do the rest of the way to lock it up? They have two games at home against Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and then the American Conference where there's nothing but landmines.
I think you're basically right with the two games against Ole Miss and Mississippi State. If they win both of those, even if they take, let's say, three bad losses in the American, look at that out of conference performance. Like this
Hmm.
last year, what ended up happening to them was it wasn't just that they faded, it's also that the wins that we thought were really good early on turned out not to be so good. And I just don't see that this year. Like they've already got road wins over Clemson and Virginia. And even if you don't believe in either of those teams that much, they're still true road wins this early into the season. Obviously, we think UConn's going to stay a quad one win throughout the course of the year. They they played Auburn on a neutral court. Yeah, they got blown out, but it was Auburn. Like, how much does that even really hurt? If you look at what they've done in quadrant one, this is kind of a blessing in disguise for Memphis going into the American because they can't screw that record up. It's kind of like frozen in place. And at the end of the day, I just even if they pick up a few bad losses in American play, what's the committee? How is the committee going to look at that quad one record and be okay leaving them out of the tournament? I just don't think they will. So if they beat Ole Miss and Mississippi State, I think it's a virtual lock that Memphis will be in the field.
Yeah, I think they would have to really crash and burn at that point. I think even if they were to lose both of those games in the I guess they're at home. I was going to say in the Magnolia State, but even if they lose both, like as long as they don't completely mess up in AAC play, like 15-3, probably good enough. Provided the loss doesn't come against like a 250 type team.
If they're 15-3, they're a four-loss team entering the American. Like they would be. We're talking about a great seed at that point. I think they have a lot of wiggle room in the American. You saw what the committee did with FAU last year. I personally had them as a 10 seed entering the NCAA tournament. The committee gave them an 8. The committee believed in FAU because of what they did in the non-conference portion of the season, and they did not perform particularly well in the American. But you know what? If you perform as an out of conference team when you're in a mid major, the committee almost always rewards that. They give you a little bit of slack in your conference.
Throw the list back up there again because this is the category that everybody was mad about, right? The Memphis fans, the Dayton fans, the San Diego State fans, they were the ones yelling at you. San Diego State fans are always yelling. I don't know why they're so mad. It must be the house pricing out there or something. It's wonderful weather. But yeah, these are the teams where, obviously Gonzaga, Memphis, they've done very well thus far. Dayton's done extremely well thus far, but the opportunities just aren't there, right? We're looking forward with this. It's not, you know, I appreciated the one person who said there should be more tiers. I'm always down for more tiers, but I don't disagree with any of this in terms of who's, likely bubble, probably in. Like Dayton right now I have as what a 5 seed. I think they would absolutely 100% be a lock if the tournament was today, but it's not. The only thing that I would disagree with you on is your lack of respect for the A10 in general. No St. Bonaventure, no Rhode Island, no Loyola Chicago. All you have is Dayton and VCU. Why do you hate the A10, Graham? We live in A10 country.
Well, the irony of that is I had Loyola Chicago in on my previous bracket, and then my new bracket today, St. Bonaventure was my second team out of the field, or third team out of the field behind Colorado and Penn State. So, not for lack of respect for the A10. I just, again, it's looking into the future. What have you done compared to what losses are you likely to take in your conference along the way? And that's where I think San Diego State and Dayton are both very close to being in that probably in category, but there's a lot of landmines along the way as well. And what happens if, one of these wins ends up not looking quite as great as you think it did at the time, too? What we saw with Memphis last year. For example, Dayton, I think we're pretty confident UConn's going to stay a quad one win. I think we're pretty confident Marquette's going to stay a quad one win. But beyond that, what if VCU fades down the stretch and then all of a sudden you go into A10 play and you were banking on the potential to pick up quality wins against VCU, but those are no longer quality wins. Like that's the tough part of being a mid-major. And is it fair? Maybe it's not fair, but it's reality. Your schedule doesn't do you any favors once you get past the non-conference portion of the season.
All right, we are almost out of our recording time frame because I have not upgraded to Zoom Pro. Call your shot over under 1.5 regular season losses for Drake this season,
Over.
and over two lo so you don't think there's any at-large chance if they suffer at least 2 losses, I assume.
No, I think a two-loss Drake, I think they could get in. I think they
All right,
probably would get in. I'll go and say that. I think Drake at 2 losses probably makes the field.
I hope so. They do have a few quality wins thus far. Certainly the surprise beating or winning the Charleston Classic. I didn't think they were going to beat Kansas State yesterday. All
Well,
right,
the Kansas
that
State
is
game is a true road game, even though it was in Kansas City.
yes.
That's an important caveat for Drake.
My dog's jumping up to let us know we're out of time. Hopefully we can do this again before another 2 weeks pass. But until then, take care.